Hi, it's Dwyer, gamblersadvisory.com, dwyersportsbetting.com. Remember, the opinion you should follow should be your own. Just consider this video to be a second opinion from a complete stranger online. I thought long and hard about this video. It's going to be a little controversial. Understand it's just one man's opinion. As I like to say, you should follow yours, right? I've waited until this player has had a great game because I didn't want to openly criticize him while he was on a bad streak. The other day, Olajuwon made a statement where he said that Jordan was far superior, his words, far superior to LeBron James, right? Far superior. For those of us who lived through the Jordan era, I believe that that's obvious. But let's just say I've come across younger gamblers who believe that LeBron is at least Jordan's equal, if not better than Jordan. They'll make the argument that LeBron is a better passer than Michael Jordan. They'll make the argument that LeBron is physically bigger than Michael Jordan, right? They'll make the argument that Jordan played with a Bill Cartwright, right? Had a Scottie Pippen, had a Mookie Blaylock, right? They'll say Jordan had more talent around him than LeBron had when LeBron willed the Cleveland Cavaliers to their appearance in the finals. I believe back then LeBron was playing with Larry Hughes, right? The argument is pre-Miami Heat, LeBron James was dominant enough to get a subpar team into the NBA Finals. They'll talk about the fourth quarter of a pivotal game against the Detroit Pistons where LeBron hijacked the game. It is one of the legendary moments in NBA history, right? It's that game that gets Cleveland into the NBA Finals. Now let me say this. Understand that not everything is statistical, right? There's a realm of sports that's outside of stats, right? Far outside of stats. It builds around nebulous concepts like leadership ability, personality, right? Now, first let me say the obvious. On the court, in my opinion, LeBron wasn't the athlete that Michael Jordan was, right? You can call it quick twitch muscles, whatever. I like a term coined by Greg Cosell in talking about Seattle quarterback Russell Wilson, and that's structured improvisation, right? Michael Jordan simply did things faster, more acrobatically, right? More decisively than LeBron James. He's just a much more explosive player. I believe Jordan was the kind of guy who could quickly move to the basket, and he could read and react. So he could move at a speed few could move at, and then he could do things like change his ball in midair. I don't think it's rehearsed. I think Jordan would leave his feet and would know, okay, if they're going to block this hand, I'm going to come back to this hand, and I'm going to lean this way, right? And Jordan, simply put, was a notch above LeBron in terms of athleticism, hang time, the ability to think quickly and do so decisively. But let's move off the court. Let's move into the realm of just personality. In my opinion, LeBron has a handicap personality-wise. I'm just a casual fan. I don't know LeBron. I'm not one of these guys trying to know LeBron personally, right? I'm just trying to profit off of betting either on or against the Cleveland Cavaliers, right? I believe LeBron has a personality problem. He's passive-aggressive. He does certain things where you're supposed to read into what he's doing. I've spoken to other hardcore fans of basketball, and there's a theory out there that LeBron has been trying to teach his team a lesson, right? So LeBron took 2 weeks off. Now let me just point out the obvious. If Michael Jordan took himself out of the game for a couple of weeks for physical concerns, right? Health concerns. I'm telling you that Jordan's personality was such that there would be no doubt whatsoever that Michael Jordan couldn't play during that period of time. There'd be no doubt that Jordan was injured, right? There would never be a moment, ever, where we would say, Jordan's taking himself out to prove something to somebody. Because that's just not what Michael Jordan's personality was about. Right? You know the personality type I'm talking about. You know that when that guy is in the regular season, he's all out. Period. Now, I believe we secretly know that that's not LeBron James, right? We question LeBron so much that there are even doubts about a playoff game when LeBron was with Cleveland, where he hardly took shots in the fourth quarter. That's before LeBron leaves to go to Miami, right? Well, now we have a situation where LeBron recently pushed his coach, pushed him out of the way, in a manner in which we all understand that a Bill Belichick, a Doc Rivers, a Joe Torre would never be pushed. Right? Never. Ever. And this isn't the first time LeBron has pushed a coach. Right? He bumped into Eric Spoelstra way back in the day. I believe that's LeBron's personality. He's a passive-aggressive guy. He does things so that you're supposed to read symbolisms. We all have people in our lives like this, right? They don't say what they mean. You can't turn to them and say, we're good, right? And get an answer you can rely upon. Now look, being passive-aggressive has its benefits. That's why people are passive-aggressive, right? That's why you have a lot of hinting and stuff like that. You have passive-aggressive cultures, right? I'm sure none of us believe that all of these coaches in the offseason in the NFL who mutually decided to part ways with their team did so the way it's being reported. I'm sure a lot of these cases are situations where the team said, hey, you're out of here, buddy. And then, of course, we're going to get the passive-aggressive sell, right? The packaging, the marketing, right? That's who LeBron is. The problem with that persona is it's not a leadership persona. Right? It simply isn't. Right? He's pushing his coach. Does he want the coach out or not? Right? He's not the kind of guy who would do what, according to folklore, Magic Johnson did back in the day after winning an NBA title. Very next year, Johnson's like, look, I want Paul Westhead out of here. Right? But understand, there's a difference. Magic's like Jordan. Blunt. Upfront. Right? LeBron, a little bit different. Packaged. Wants to be liked. Wants to say what you want to hear. Right? Let's talk about Michael Jordan for a second. Let me take Akeem's statements one step further. Right? Understand, with Jordan, right, he was going to ruffle feathers. Right? He wasn't afraid to openly disagree with management. You understood. He wanted more money. When his contract was up, he said, hey, I'm only signing one-year deals. You understood that. Right? Understand, with that personality type, I think Larry Bird, throw him in the mix too. With that personality type, they're going to diplomatically tell you exactly what they're thinking. They're not going to go over to the sidelines with a lot of anger and push a coach, right? As if he's a non-entity and not an authority figure, right? Larry Bird wouldn't dream of just pushing Casey Jones. That's not who he is. He's not going to be walking up and bumping guys to send messages, right? You understood. You understand that if Larry Bird is hurt and can't play, it's not because he's trying to prove points to teammates. Right? That's not who he is. Now let me say this. When you're a blunt kind of leader, right? A blunt kind of leader, like a Jordan, like a Larry Bird, understand you're on the firing line. Right? People know where you stand. Now, it's my belief that 20% of the people secretly hate you regardless of who you are. Right? They'll hate you. Understand, they're silenced during the good times. Right? During the good times, people are fawning over you. The group that privately hates you, that's planning your funeral the day they meet you, they're silenced. But when times get bad, that's when I believe that group comes out of the cave and goes after you. Right? Understand, when you're not passive aggressive, when you're just aggressive, when you're blunt, when you're a Patton type leader, when you're a General MacArthur type leader, when you're a Michael Jordan type of leader, people are going to come down on you. Understand, a General Patton, a General MacArthur, I think we all understand that sooner or later, that kind of bold leadership is going to self-implode. Right? Corporations can't have charismatic leader type guys in the building, right, who have been in power if there's been a power change. Right? In other words, if you're the bold, visionary leading up a department and the corporation bypasses you to pick someone else, in part because they're afraid of your decisiveness, right? That corporation, even though they value your work, can't keep you in the building, right? You have situations, you see it clearly in the NFL, right? Bold, competent, original coordinator, offensive or defensive. The team changes the head coach. If they aren't going to pick the bold coordinator, then they necessarily have to send him packing. Think Rex Ryan, when he was the defensive coordinator for the Baltimore Ravens. Right? Ravens bypassed him. They promoted John Harbaugh. You understood Rex Ryan could not stay in the building. Right? There's a sense of accountability that aggressive guys who don't flinch from being in power have, that everyone understands is a risk, that makes their perch a little bit more short term. Right? You know where the buck stopped with Michael Jordan. Every team he was on, you knew the buck stopped with him. He wasn't trying to be on both sides of the argument. Right? You knew what Jordan was about. It was well defined. You knew where he stood. Passive aggressives see the world differently. They're living on a different planet. They don't want to be that guy. They don't want to be Jordan. They don't want to be Bird. They don't want to be Magic. Right? Because everyone understands that guy's the leader. They don't want to be that guy. Right? They don't want to be Batman. They want to be Robin. It's a little bit different. Right? So what you have are situations where, right, these passive-aggressive guys are saying one thing and doing another. They don't mean what they say. You have situations of uncertainty. You have situations where a Dwayne Wade, aggressive leader type, a Dwayne Wade and a Chris Bosh will say, hey, we're prepared to re-sign with the Miami Heat. But yet neither of them will know whether LeBron's going to re-sign. You're going to hear nebulous things like, oh, I want to see if the team's committed to winning and stuff like that. In situations where a decisive guy would say, great, if my boys come back, I'm back, we're all in, I'm there. Right? You're going to have these ambiguous situations like you have in Cleveland right now. Where guess what? LeBron's bumping the coach. Right? Do any of us really know if LeBron really wants to play with Kyrie Irving? Right? Kevin Love being sat down in the fourth quarter of games. No statement from LeBron James. Right? You know, the news breaks on LeBron's move back to Cleveland. It's not widely disseminated. It's controlled. It's released by SI.com in a piece that had LeBron's cooperation. Right? Now, this is not to suggest that LeBron's not one of the best players ever. He is. But I believe he understands that nobody, as Wilt Chamberlain once said, nobody roots for Goliath. Right? LeBron doesn't want to be, for all of the King James name and stuff like that, he doesn't want to be accountable in a way that was necessary for a Magic, a Bird, or a Jordan. As I've said here in the past online, you know, Jordan and LeBron, they're different people. Because Jordan was alpha. You understood that. Right? Understand. Jordan back in the day, as I said, even as big as he was, there were always the people who privately hated him. Right? Because Jordan did things his way. He was out late at night. He was known to be a gambler. Right? You know, it doesn't seem controversial now, but at the time it was. You know, Jordan had a big earring in his ear. You know what I'm saying? Jordan used to refer to teammates as supporting cast. Right? Jordan showed up at the All-Star game wearing a lot of jewelry and stuff like that, and it pissed off Isaiah Thomas, who, according to folklore, then froze him out of the game. Right? Jordan didn't believe in caste systems or working within the system because you know the way Patton types, MacArthur types are. Jordan shows up and says, hey, to hell with the system. I want to get mine. I want rings. Right? So when Jordan got tired of the press, and believe it or not, there was a time where Jordan, as media savvy as he was, got tired of the press. He stopped talking to the press. Right? There was a time where he stopped talking to the press for so many days that Dan Patrick once went public and said, here's my exclusive interview with Michael Jordan. And it was Jordan looking at him, shaking his head and saying, Dan Patrick. Right? Jordan wasn't afraid to alienate people. Even people reporting on the sport. Right? You and I know that's not LeBron James. You and I know the situation in Cleveland right now is a mess. You and I know that there are people in Cleveland who don't know where they stand. You and I know that some of LeBron's old friends, Chris Bosh, won't even talk about him right now. Understand, that scene in Miami at the end was so ridiculous that Chris Bosh, Dwayne Wade, both of whom stayed with Miami, right, were contacted by other teams. Bosh was contacted by the Houston Rockets, was actually offered a max contract by the Houston Rockets, and these guys were hanging around wondering what LeBron James was going to do and these guys were supposed to be in LeBron's inner circle. And they didn't know. How passive-aggressive is it? Take a look at LeBron's letter, the one released by SI.com when he moved to Cleveland. Curiously, as Bill Simmons has pointed out, that letter doesn't refer to Andrew Wiggins, right, who was on the Cavaliers at that time, right, who is, by the way, an emerging superstar, right? We all know that LeBron seemed to realize Wiggins wasn't going to be there when he got there. He knew that so much that he didn't mention the first pick in the NBA draft in his letter. You know that's not the way Jordan would go about things. You know that's not the way Magic would go about things. So let me say this. When you're a gambler and you're looking at teams, and I'm serious about this, and you venture off the stat page into the realm of personality and stuff like that, right? And you're looking at teams and you're saying, okay, Cleveland is playing San Antonio. Understand, you know, nobody on the Spurs is going to push Greg Popovich. You know, there's a respect for the power structure. You know, rookies in that locker room are looking at Tim Duncan for guidance. Right? They know where they stand. Everyone has bought into the game plan. Right? There's no question that if Tim Duncan is missing games for 2 weeks, that it's for real reasons. Right? There isn't the uncertainty that there is in Cleveland. Right? Some superstars, you put them on a team and you understand the guy's going to go to work, and we've all been in groups where there's a guy in the group and he's just a natural leader. Ray Lewis, Baltimore Ravens. People flock to him. LeBron is really more of a Robin than a Batman. He benefited greatly by having Dwayne Wade on his team in Miami. Because people understood Dwayne Wade is really a Batman, not a Robin. Right? What Dwayne Wade did was Dwayne Wade understood LeBron's more talented. He's the better player. And Dwayne Wade shared power. Right? You don't have that Batman figure in Cleveland right now. Who's it supposed to be? Please don't tell me that guys who never made the playoffs before in their lives, like Kevin Love, are supposed to be Batman figures. Guys who aren't even in the game at key stretches of the fourth quarter. Right? Let me point out, by the way, if I'm Kevin Love, I'm getting the hell out of Cleveland at the end of this year. You've got to be kidding. LeBron's bouncing the coach and stuff like that. Forget it. You know, what am I doing in Cleveland when there's an active market for my services? If I'm a ball player with self-respect and I want to be in the game when the game matters in the fourth quarter, right? If the local coach here in Cleveland hasn't figured out that I should be in the game, then I'm getting out of town. Right? Also, Kyrie Irving. Right? You know, LeBron makes statements in the press like, oh, guys have to stop shooting and stuff like that. People understand he's a passive, so they have to read those questions because that's how he communicates. Right? So what Cleveland really needs is unfortunately for them, what LeBron had in Miami. They need a Dwayne Wade type guy. Right? A guy who's just the natural alpha. They need a Shaquille O'Neal. I'm not saying Shaq now. Shaq's out of the game, but you know what I mean. A guy who used to be the big man in the locker room, who people kind of looked at and who has that credibility. They need a kingmaker to tell the other teammates, hey, let's follow LeBron. That's what they need. You didn't need that with Magic, Bird, or Jordan. You didn't need that with Patton or General MacArthur. Right? Aggressives aren't passive aggressives. Let me just say this. Hakeem Olajuwon said Jordan was far superior to LeBron. That extends off the court to his leadership persona. Right? There's certain guys who you understand, hey, we're just going to follow this guy. Right? You understand it. We're just going to follow this guy. Right? That's a different type of guy than a guy who's bumping or pushing his first-year coach. What's that about? So I respect LeBron greatly. Huge talent. Not every talented person is the CEO. Right? LeBron by himself can't lift the Cleveland Cavaliers. Right? As I've said here in earlier videos, you need to fade the Cavs. I don't care if they beat, the Clippers in Los Angeles. Right? You need to fade the Cavs. Psychologically, the pieces aren't there. LeBron needs infrastructure. Right? He's not the guy who creates the infrastructure. That's a Jordan, not a LeBron James. Let me hear from you. Leave your comments for me here online. Let me say this too, before I lose this thought. That's an Olajuwon, not a LeBron James. Let me hear from you. Thanks for stopping by.